Okay, hello everyone. This is just a video on the Informal 5 that you submitted last week. So I'm just going to run through this and try to explain how the calculations were done. And you will also have this document in front of you. So you were given three figures, three drawings of three different buildings. Firstly, we had a new building of 40 beds planned for Bloemfontein. Figure 2 shows an existing office building completed recently with a basic historical cost of 650,000 Rand. I tried to put in the basic historical cost here to show you that there's a difference between the basic historical cost and the final building cost that I'll explain a little bit later on. I wasn't too strict on the recognizing this difference because we haven't discussed this yet, so thus I didn't mark with this in mind. Also, I did find that there was a couple of students who actually did recognize that, and yeah, I was quite impressed with that. So, and you will see in your feedback with regard to that. Just unfortunately, most of the students, there was about 3 or 4 that recognized this. Unfortunately, there were some other mistakes done in most of those submissions. So just have a look at that. If you do have queries on this specific item, you can just mail me, and then we can have a chat about that. Okay, so basically you have your basic historical cost, but the important item was the 10,000 for the paving that you had to use. So the office building, basically the volume and the rate for that was irrelevant. It didn't play any part. The only thing that you wanted from that was the paving cost that you would apply to your new building. So, and then we had figure 3, which showed a recently completed hospital with final cost of 1.3 million Rand VAT inclusive. And then you would assume that the top level of the footings is 500 millimeters below the natural ground level, and only standard finishes are used for the building. Okay, so it basically just means that you can compare the two with each other. Basic finishes just means that there's nothing special on it. There's no special equipment, and the question didn't ask for anything more special on the new building, so you didn't have to make any calculations. Usually I won't ask or go into that in too much depth. The main objective of the question was to see whether you could actually do the basics of the question. So, and then another trick or something that you had to keep in mind was that the new building had the top of the footings with 500 millimeters. I saw that caught out a couple of students as well. Is this, and then in the drawing it was different. The historical building had you had to subtract the 200 millimeters from the 800 millimeters to get to a 600 millimeter top of base level to be used in your height calculation. So then this second section was, or then the actual question was, with the information you estimate your final building costs. So that means your all-inclusive cost. That includes your external works, your P's and G's, contingencies, and so forth. Okay, just as a note, on that is I didn't give you the contingencies and the VAT and so forth. As I mentioned in the class, if nothing of that is given, your contingencies is usually equal to 10%. Your P's and G's is usually equal to 10% again, and your VAT is always 15%. Okay, so please note that, but I marked with that, so you will see in the second little clip is that this actually I marked with the 14%, and or if you had contingencies of 2.5% or 8% or whatever, your P's and G's many use 8% as per the example that we used, shown in the appendixes. So that is really not too big a thing to be concerned about. It is up to your discretion, except if I do give you these figures, you can basically use what was used in the examples or so, but the rule of thumb is to always use 10% for your P's and G's. Let me just, I have it the wrong way around. There we go. So we've got the P's and G's as 10% usually, then your contingencies is added to that. Remember, it's cumulative, so I think there was one or two that that added it separately to the total building or the basic building cost that was calculated. Please note that it's cumulative, so you first work out your 10% P's and G's, and then you add that to your basic building cost, and then you only add 10% to that total, and then you add that again, and then you add 15% to that total. So just make sure of that. Okay, so that is basically just the discussions before we actually start. So yeah. Okay, so in the first clip I just went through the question. Now the second section, you will see I'm just going to go quickly through the drawing. So here's our new hospital that we need to construct. So you would see that we've got a total floor area of 45 times 10, and I had the question on whether you can use the a single story building, comparing it to a double story. Yes, in this instance, that was all that you had. If you do have a double story building, it's always good to compare the cost between your ground floor and first floor, if you do have that type of information. But with this question, you didn't have that luxury, so all that you had to do was basically use your the cost that you would calculate from figure 3 and times that with the volume of your figure 1. So just keep that in mind. Also, you would see that we had some new external paving that was added. I didn't add any external works like pipe work and groundworks and so on, just to keep it simple. Otherwise it just becomes too much to calculate. But you will see as I go through the calculations with regard to that. Obviously, if I do include some other items, you need to take that into account. So, but usually in a test, that's too much information to try and have in one specific question. So that was excluded. So the only thing that you had to do was to calculate your volume cost and then add your paving area as well, so that you can actually get to your basic cost to which you can add your P's and G's, and then your contingencies and VAT. Okay, so that was that. Then drawing 2 or figure 2, your historical office building. The only purpose of this building was to calculate your paving area. So you didn't have to calculate the volume of this, and you would see there was a couple of catches here anyway with the wall plate height, the ceiling height, and so on, which all differed, which I think many of you guys took cognizance of. Just be aware of that. That might be a thing in other questions to actually use the correct height. So just remember that if you use your cube method, it's from the top of your strip footing up to the middle of your roof area. So it's always good to draw it out from the gable end, just to see that you've calculated your height correctly. So just make sure that you've got that. Okay, so have a look at that so that you understand how that's calculated. I'll maybe make another video on that just to clarify that, but that's irrelevant for this question. Okay, so that's basically it. So just going through the memo. So if you do go through the memo, this is all the information provided, and then you would see I've added the memo and the calculations here. So this was basically all that you had to do, is you had to calculate your historical values. You can see the paving is added here and the building volume here, so that you can actually calculate your basic rates so that you can apply to your new building right here at the bottom. Okay, and then you would see that I've added two answers. The one actually has your historical rate excluding your P's and G's, and then we've got a second answer which most students used, was basically just using your basic historical value here to calculate your rate per volume. Okay, so in the next clip that I'm going to show, I'm going to use the 1.3 million because it's just easier to calculate, but you can have a look at this, the 1.1 million that I calculated here, how that was done. I'm going to explain that in the next clip, and also in the next video with the next method of calculating your new building estimates. Okay, so just be aware of that. And also then I just added one or two basic feedback items here at the bottom so that you can just see one of the common things that was asked. So in a nutshell, that's basically how the memo works. So you can have a look at the memo, and if there's any other questions, you're more than free to contact me if you need any assistance with that. Okay, so let's get into the calculations. Firstly, our historical building is, you would see that the memo shows you basically the following, and you will see that I've added how the area was calculated first. That is times with your total height. So you go to your drawing. So the first applicable area or volume that you need to calculate is your figure 3. So you would see this is the 3.5, 1.5 and a 3.5 added together times your length. So it's your length times your breadth, and you would also see that the information actually showed your wall plate height as 2.6 here, and also your top, or your excavations, the top of your strip footing is calculated by subtracting the 200 millimeters here from your 800 millimeters here. So you couldn't use the 5.8. There was one or two students who actually used the 0.5 instead of the 0.6. So just make sure that you do read your question thoroughly whenever you do that. Okay, I'll do a little clip on how that is calculated, because you would see that this is calculated to your wall plate height, on how that's actually calculated. So just bear that in mind. So let's get back to the calculations. So you've got your 0.6 here and your 2.6 meters to your wall plate height, and then you've got your tan calculation here, or the middle of your roof. So you basically use the breadth of your building, and you divide it by 2 to get your rectangular triangle, and that is divided by 2, so you get 4.25 for this length here. And you would see that I've added a little cheat sheet here on a calculation here just to do a double check whether I'm correct or not. So basically what you have is half of a 4.25 times your tan 18. Please make sure that your calculators does this, that you know how to use your calculator whenever you're calculating your tan function, using your tan function. So then the next question is to which area do I round it off, or which decimal do I round it off? So I'm going to quickly paste this into another cell just to show you how that works. So whenever you do your calculations, you would get something in the range of the following. Let me just see. Oh, it's already added the that calculation. I'm just going to take this out. Okay, so here you see that we've calculated our 1.80908.709. So whenever you do your calculations, you won't have the luxury to actually use all of this, except if you know how to use your memory function on your calculator. Usually the best thing is to round it off to 2 decimals. So in this case, we would round it off to 1.38. So you will see here I've done it. I've rounded it to 1.38. So you can just round that off to the nearest decimal. So please make sure that you do that correctly. I see Excel is not giving me the function of actually, or the luxury actually, to manipulate this. I wonder why that is, but so just do it manually and then you round it off. You would see in Excel I just used the function to actually round that, and you would see a little bracket here where I've just done that for you. So what I've done is I've added the 0.69 because you still have to divide this by 2, so you get 1.38 and then you divide it by 2 to get the middle of your roof height. Okay, so you divide that by 2 to get to the 0.69, and then you just add your strip footing height and then up to your wall plate to get your total height for your building. Okay, and then so that is the first calculation. So you get your volume of 479.44. Again, you would see I rounded it off to 2 decimals here. And then we get to the little catch that was in the question. Yeah, I think this was a bit harsh to actually include this in here, but you need to be able to distinguish between what your basic building cost is and then your final building cost. Your final building cost always includes this section where you add your P's and G's, your contingencies, and so forth. But for your historical building, you know that building is already completed, so contingencies is not applicable to historical buildings, because the building is complete, the final count has been completed, and thus there's no contingencies, no provision for any unknowns in that building. So that was the final building cost for that building. Okay, so just a note of that. Whenever you do this calculation, please make sure that you use the same rate for your P's and G's that you subtract from here in your here at the bottom. So I've used P's and G's for 10% here as explained earlier, so thus I need to subtract 10% here again. Also, please note that little explanation of the apples and how to subtract your VAT and any other percentage from your apples. So please make sure that you understand that. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to 1.3 million. Just to make it easier, the calculations, and most people actually had used 1.3 million, which is fine, and I think that was a good way to start. is you use your 1.3 million and you divide that basically with your cube area method that you've done. Okay, so that is that, and then you've had to calculate your paving as well. So from figure 2, you didn't have any paving in your historical hospital that you had here, thus you had to calculate paving somewhere else, and that's why I included this figure to actually assist you with that. So you would see that you calculate your area, which is again your length is the 3.5 plus 3.5 plus 3.5 times the 1.5 meters wide. So to get your volume or your square meter area, which is this 15.75 square meters here. Then you take your 10,000, that's here in your question that was provided, and there was no P's and G's included in this because this was your basic cost given to you. Okay, so again, make sure what is included in your basic cost and what is included in your final building cost. Okay, so a little bit of a trick question if I do ask that, so just be aware of that. Okay, so then basically just divide that by your 10,000 by the 15.75 to get to your 634 rand per square meter. Okay, and that's basically how you calculate your historical data. So in the next clip we're going to apply this to our new building. Okay, so here we go. Now we can calculate our new building. So you would see it's the 10 times the 45 meters to get your total floor area. Just remember it's only for your ground floor because you're calculating your total or you're timesing it with your total height. So do not use your calculation for both floors to times it with the height, because then it will be the same as doing it for two buildings. Why I'm saying that is sometimes I do ask to calculate the square meter rate first, or do the first, calculate the final cost using the square meter rate and then the cube method to compare the two, and then students may use that calculation that you did for your square meter area. So just be aware of that. Do not take a short route when calculating your volume. Okay, so your 45 and times your 10 for your square meter of your hospital. Then you've got your height that you calculate, which is your first floor plus your second floor plus the bottom or to the top of your strip footing, and then the middle of your roof calculation, which you will see that I've added here the cheat sheets again, from which I just did this little drawing so that you get to an answer of 1.92 and you divide that by 2. So here I've just done that to make sure that the rounding off is correct, and so it's a 0.5 plus 2.4 plus the 3 plus the 0.96. Okay, and now I see it's just given it in rand, so I'm just gonna quickly fix that. There we go. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. Okay, cool. So there we go. Okay, looks fine like that. Okay, so just be aware of that, that's not rand. So your height, if we just go back to our drawing, you will see there's the 3, there's a 2.4 up to your wall plate. Here you can actually see it nicely how to calculate your triangle. If you in doubt, for instance, if I do give you to the ceiling height and then you have to add another 400 millimeters for your beam filling to get your wall plate height, always draw it out if you're a little bit unsure, just to see what it's asked and how it actually works. Okay, so I think everything should be straightforward from there. Then you calculate your area, and you get to your volume of 3087 cubic meters. Okay, then you take your rate that you calculated previously, you times those two together, and then you just add your paving to that, and you add those together to get your total basic cost. So from your basic cost, then you add your P's and G's, add them together, add your contingencies, add them together, then you add your VAT, add them together, and so on. Okay, and that's basically the calculation. This last little bit counts about 10 marks. So it's again that for your cubes that you have to calculate, and then using your historical data. Then this was just using those two. So this is a little bit of bonus marks, these two, and then I just added 1 mark for actually doing the calculation correctly. I think there's a little bit of a mistake here, so this should actually be 1 there as well if your answer is correct. Okay, so what would have happened, many of you would have used P's and G's of 8%, so I would have put that in there, and many would have used 2.5% here. And then I can just work with the mistake, or not mistake, but with the percentages that you actually used here. So that's why I leave it open sometimes, and why I'm not too strict on what percentages you do use. Although I would like you to use 10% here, because it's usually more realistic in practice for 10% here and a 10% there. Okay, so I'm just going to change that back, and I think that is basically the answer. Yeah, I'll go through it. If you do have any questions, please come back to me, and then I'll gladly assist.